Welcome to the third episode of BAI Communications Smart Communities podcast, where we speak with business leaders and industry experts to ask them what the future holds for connectivity. In this episode, we're excited to be joined by Khalid Aziz, Head of Global Ventures and Smart City Connectivity Solutions at Signify, formerly Philips Lighting. Interviewing him is Justin Berger, BAI Communications Chief Strategy Officer, talking about how connected lighting and partnerships between ecosystem players are illuminating the future of smart communities.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our BAI Communications Smart Communities podcast, a new episode. I am Justin Berger. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer of BAI. And today I have the pleasure to be joined by Khalid Aziz, who's the SVP and Head of the Connectivity Business Unit at Signify. Welcome, Khalid.
Thank you, Justin.
You know that at BAI we are passionate about this idea of smart city and smart community to a broader sense. So I'm interested in your take and your view in how lighting and then smart lighting and connectivity based on lighting. How can all of that contribute to the smart community theme?
Oh, absolutely, and I think it's a very fascinating time, Justin, that we also see coming from the lighting angle that where lighting has been the source of energy and transforming the needs for general public. We see that the utility of lighting evolving significantly by incorporating different technologies around sensoring and energy efficiency. And what we have seen over the last few years is a major transformation taking place. Just to give you an example, cities typically, 20% of their investment or 20% of their budgets are allocated towards power and lighting infrastructures. And where Signify sees that, we not only transform that lighting by huge energy savings that allows cities to be more sustainable, but it also then incorporates certain levels of technology innovations that enable the cities to apply applications such as safety and security and community services. And that's a major trend that we are driving and leading the market, leveraging our footprint of lighting globally for that.
Which cities, or are there any specific cities or regions across the world where you see a bigger potential for this technology or for deploying this new type of networks?
So maybe let's to share with you the vision of let's say connectivity, particularly on the lighting infrastructure. So what as I mentioned, I think it's a remarkable time when the requirements are moving from being vertical industries to much more of horizontal platforms. And that's where we see that lighting grid or lighting infrastructure can play a pivotal role for the next generation of connectivity requirements, simply delivering a broadband backhaul to really allow many applications for cities, for IoT services, for communication densification on existing powered up platform. So when you look at in dense city environments, there are not many established vertical assets that can be utilized for the need of communication. Whereas if you look at from a micro or a nano demand of connectivity, that is really requiring a ubiquitous layer of connectivity services. And we see that, that's where our portfolio has evolved over the years, is to really provide seamless backhaul connectivity and accessing the closest fiber networks using the light infrastructure. When it comes to really the applications across what kind of cities, so we are broadly engaged. The way we see it is three-tier approach. Tier one being very large, complex urban environments or dense urban environments, such as Los Angeles, New York, London, and so forth, where a deployment really creates different complexity for different layer of stakeholders involved. Then you have tier two sort of cities, which are kind of having the fear of losing out, catching up with large cities on the connectivity and digital requirements. And that's where also the lighting platform plays a very pivotal role, because that already exists. And then there are also these, tier three environments where, especially, expedited by COVID, is how do you bridge the digital divide? How do you provide broadband connectivity to pretty much every household that is required? So the way we engage across the market is, really covering this broad range of different tiers of cities.
That's fascinating, and I mean, as you start touching on broader connectivity, that's where BAI and Signify start to converge, of course. And I'm interested in that solution, and if you could tell us a bit more about the way lighting can start playing a role into providing broader connectivity to places like schools or provide Wi-Fi. So what's the solution that you've got here?
Yeah, and that's really the real fascination or fascinating point of our future proposition, where we are very excited and very honored to work with BAI. We see, as I mentioned, from a lighting point, we have built out the portfolio or the solution that allows a seamless conversion of really bringing the way I put it is the typical connectivity platform requires fiber under the ground to be connected out. Now, if you take an example of a city like London, where you have almost 600 cameras per square kilometer, every single point really requires either a fiber connection or a typical copper connection available for those cameras. Now, what if that would require a single point of injection to bring out that fiber to the air, and then light basically does the rest of the job by connecting that broadband over the ground? And that is really the proposition that we have as a solution, where our lighting units are now capable to communicate at multi-gigabit connectivity on a wireless level, really providing a virtual fiber solution. Simply, it's over the ground, and then enabling every single node that is available in that environment to be accessible for any sort of broadband application that may be required. And this is where this is what the let's say, in summary, the proposition of this new solution is all about.
And a bit of a challenging question, but what do you think it takes to convince cities? And the answer might be different, for a tier 1 city or a tier 2 city. But what do you think it takes to convince them to work with us on such a vision? What do you think is the best way for a city to approach this overarching issue of connectivity?
I think it's very difficult to generalize. That's what our experience is. Every city has a particular need or drive or positioning of their requirements, but there are some common trends that are constantly, you could see it across the board. Cities have been engaged for years trying to deploy or also deploying digital infrastructures, may it be citywide fiber networks, may it be different verticals for security services, for connectivity needs, and so on. And the difficulty that the cities find, what we see in all the conversations, that it's very difficult to sort of manage, each of the use case independently, and to have the maximum utility of all their infrastructure assets. And I think with this joint proposition that we bring out, when the cities see that their existing needs can also be served, plus the future needs can be catered at a lower cost, plus it provides an opportunity for cities to potentially also monetize part of their assets that have been typically been on the more on the cost side of the equation, and now they can actually start monetizing or creating additional revenue streams. I think that typically resonates very strongly with the city to certainly and suddenly kind of realize that there are new opportunities evolving in this business model that can be extracted for their benefit.
Yeah, I could not agree more with what you say. I also think it's important for a city to take the lead in designing this project. There are so many examples of all of the benefits that you described. The city is trying to achieve them, but sort of independently. And the backbone network infrastructure, proper layer of network is where it all starts.
Yes.
And this can only be driven by a central entity in a city. It takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of organization to achieve that. But we both know some very good example of such achievement.
Absolutely, and I think more and more, I think we see also the kind of the leading cities are driving the way for many others to follow. So the trend is, even though it's a it's an emerging one, but it is emerging across the board. Recently, we have been engaged with a state in India where a statewide initiative to leapfrog the connectivity from sort of a general connectivity to a broadband, truly broadband 5G enabled connectivity, and the proposition of really building out alternative infrastructures or utilizing alternative infrastructures to facilitate that really made the equation become much more credible for both the cities involved in that state and also the other stakeholders, whether those are regulators, whether those are permit allowers, because that really gives the opportunity to reutilize their existing assets.
You mentioned London a little bit earlier. So, obviously we're very proud at BAI to have been awarded a fantastic concession by Transport for London and to be deploying a very exciting network across the city and the transport corridors. And obviously, we're excited to work together on that project. Thinking specifically about London, are there any specific, either opportunities or challenges that you see in a city like London, which is like no other?
Absolutely, and first of all, a big congratulations again. I think that is simply a remarkable achievement to be at the forefront of that transformation at the most complex, perhaps, the cities in the world. And the way we see it as well, that this partnership can really evolve is, the TfL assets, when you look around, both the underground, within the ground, and over the ground, and you know it better than anybody else how that infrastructure is currently designed and built out. But we foresee that, I think the demand of connectivity again, risen by the city's own needs, by the communities and the safety and security services, by the public Wi-Fi or 4G, 5G access, that requires a sort of a ubiquitous layer of wireless connectivity, whether you're under the ground or over the ground, enabled by, of course, very strong conduits of fiber. But the challenge really in an environment like London happens is that, the last 5 meters to pull out fiber out of the ground is usually a very complex exercise of very many stakeholders that needs to be engaged. And I think that's where our joint proposition really helps to build these arteries of broadband backhaul connectivity over the ground as well, enabled by lighting infrastructure that then can be utilized by multiple stakeholders and businesses in that environment. And we believe that there are numerous use cases. Some we can already define today, whether those are connected buses, providing public Wi-Fi services to its citizens, whether those are, camera and security services around the TfL assets, or in future, when you look at it, all the mobility that requires extensive connectivity on the move, not necessarily latency driven, but much more throughput and bandwidth driven, that requires an infrastructure that is available or able to cater for those service provisioning. And we believe that, utilizing those assets and transforming those assets would be something very similar that happens. It's like a chicken or egg. What comes first? Is it the application that comes first, or is it the infrastructure that comes first? And I think jointly here, if the way we would address it potentially is, if the infrastructure is laid out, your utility of the infrastructure really follows through very quickly. It hardly ever happens that you put up the connectivity infrastructure and it lacks applications to run that.
And we've briefly touched on the topic of mobile network operators. So in your sort of ecosystem and in your solution, where do you see the MNOs play in that?
I think the MNOs are clearly an important part of the entire equation. That's where the demand side of terminal utility and the terminals penetration really resides. But I think there is more and more realization around the MNOs as well that creating individual networks to cater for multiple variable applications is not so much of a differentiation. you really need to have specialized partners and players that can create those ubiquitous and general networks that can be then resided and utilized by the MNOs to provide their differentiated services as compared to just a network layer. And I think that's where MNOs and neutral hosts are really becoming the key players, really jointly defining the layer of connectivity where MNOs reside and utilize as per their requirement. And I think in the MNO front, we also see a major shift between latency-led services or mission-critical services to a large extent, and throughput-led services, which are also becoming a significant increase. I mean, just if you look at the outdoor Wi-Fi market, which is expected to grow at 18% CAGR for the next 5 to 7 years, is all led by everything that we see around that requires to be connected to some sort of an wireless infrastructure, which is not catered by the MNO infrastructure typically. And that's where these multiple layers are, come into play. Even though the service provisioning is done by MNOs, the service availability is really catered by the likes of VAI as neutral host in that environment.
Back to the topic of smart community, and we've talked a lot about tier 1, tier 2 cities. I'm interested now in deep diving a little bit into the sort of the rural aspect. And you mentioned that this is also part of your vision. So could you expand a little bit on what specific role do you see lighting, smart lighting, and lighting connectivity play in these areas?
Indeed, and I think that's also been a big realization over the course of the last 2 to 3 years as we have engaged in the markets, and particularly, as I mentioned earlier, I think it's a major sort of an acceleration trend that is driven by COVID, where the digital divide was horribly exposed in some of the very developed markets as well. That fiber to the home promise, has not been really kept up with the pace of requirement and demands in suburban and rural environments, where the communities, including schools, public libraries, do not have the sufficient level of public connectivity. And then comes the challenge that who builds that network, and as private entities, whether they are fiber companies or MNOs, the business cases are quite needs to be very robust in terms of the demand side, and usually rural and remote areas do not necessarily justify those heavy investments upfront. So there is a clear gap out there, which then makes those towns and communities realize what alternatives can be applied. Now, again, guess what? Which infrastructure exists? Lighting already exists at that infrastructure. And if so, on the back of the lighting infrastructure, I think one of the key use cases that we see is the fixed wireless access. Really providing sort of the like of the FTTH service, but effectively providing it wirelessly through the lighting infrastructure. So we are now in talks with, just to give you an example, with the cities in Germany, for example. These are tier 3 cities, but the key problem statement is how to expand the fiber-like connectivity to the districts and the let's say relatively remote areas, using the light infrastructure if it can extend, and the way it can extend the fiber connectivity across those areas. And again, for city, it's really a win-win situation, because not only they provide connectivity access to their citizens, but also the security services, the efficient lighting that also saves them the energy consumption, and so on and so forth. And all these things really start to come together as the need and demand really at the macro level is expanding. Just maybe last remark, not only these are the cities that have realized, but if you see the green investment bill across EU, the American Investment Act that has been, expending a lot of infrastructure upgrade, has a major component to really digitalize these tier 2 and tier 3 environments as well.
It's fascinating. And I think I can only agree with your comment on the business case. There is a divide. There is a wish from everyone to bridge that gap, but there is a challenging business case. And so I mean, there's a few things. There's the government investment, subsidies that are more often than not required to make this work.
Absolutely.
There's a wish to avoid overbuild and over competition in this area, because that could destroy any business case. But then there's, of course, innovative and clever solution. And that's where I think, a solution like the one you have deployed that really reduces the total cost of ownership of building those links comes into play, and is really something that can help progress that beyond subsidies, for example.
Indeed, and I think very rightly mentioned. I think the key of a solution is when it is scalable to demand. So you're not building out the entire infrastructure upfront, but you're really creating an opportunity to scale as the need evolves. And to make it very simple, it is all about really replacing a 10-minute job of replacing a luminaire on a pole that allows you the next district to be accessible for broadband connectivity. And then if the next one needs to be done, you replace another luminaire on the pole. And that's a very significantly different, or I would say disruptively different way of expanding broadband backhauling as compared to a legacy way where you really have to dig the entire infrastructure, lay out the fiber networks, and then wait and see who comes and uses it. And most often, the ones that are expected to use will like to have their independent infrastructure deployed rather than camping on what is done by the city or the community itself.
Well, I think all what is left for me is to thank you, Khalid, for joining us on this Smart Community podcast for BAI Communication. It's been a pleasure to talk with you and to get your perspective on the topic of smart communities and how Signify can contribute and how we together through our partnership can achieve this vision. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Pleasure is mine. Thank you so much, Justin.